Hey, welcome back to another video here on Freewheel Photos. We're back inside of ON1 Photo Raw 2024, editing a photo of a bird. I'd love to hear your comments down below on what you think about the edit or the technique. Now, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo Raw 2024 or anything else in the ON1 Photo Raw store, consider using my coupon code FreeWheelPhotos20. It'll save you some money at checkout, and I make a small commission. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the computer and take a look at this edit. Okay, so here we are inside of the computer, and this is the original edit that I made as I was just kind of messing around. Here is what we came into the editing bay with, and this is where we're going to go back to and start modifying. You can see I use Brilliance AI as well as local adjustments and some effects. Now, like normal, I don't always recreate everything that I make originally, and this is just to show you the exercise of understanding what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit original, and that brings us back over to the develop module. I'm going to go ahead and click Brilliance AI because I think that this is where we can really get some good mileage. At least I'm getting good mileage, and you know, I give that disclaimer every time. But here is the before, and here is the after for this particular image. You can see that it just opens up those shadows, and it does look pretty nice. Now, one of the things that I enjoy about this particular image is that there are shadows in this, photo. And so we're going to bring a lot of that back. Now, the way that I do that is through local adjustments. So I'm going to hit add local adjustment. And I'm going to hit I'm just going to click the masking bug this time. You could hit the letter M on your keyboard. I'm just going to click the masking bug. And instead of selecting gradient, I'm going to select reflected gradient. Now, I've used this a few times in previous tutorials, but what this does is if I click right here on this bird, it puts an even or linear gradient on both sides of whatever portion of the image that I select. And this is giving me that mask that I think I really want. And what I enjoy about this is I can move these freely of one another, and it's all on one adjustment. So let me just rename this. I'm going to call this darken. Yeah, we'll just call it darken. It doesn't really need a complicated name. And I'm just going to pull this down a little bit and fade this out. So now we're getting that darker, I guess, top and bottom of the image that I was really enjoying. And there's tons of ways that you could do this, but this is just the way that I feel like doing it for this particular image. I'm going to go ahead and pull down on the exposure because I do want this to be a little bit darker. I'm also going to pull down on my shadows because, like I said, I want this area to be darker. So if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see it kind of just narrows our focus right here into the center of the photo, which is where the main subject is. So now we are good to go there, but I feel like we need to do something with our bird because it doesn't look like it's popping off of the screen. So what I'm going to do is hit add filter, or add adjustment, I should say. And I'm going to rename this. So bird adjustment. And I didn't spell adjustment right, but it doesn't matter because we know what it is. And I'm just going to go ahead and double click that. I'm going to pull up on my exposure, and I double click exposure to reset it. So if you ever double click on any of the text after you've made some adjustments here and you're like, oh man, I want to get back, you can hit reset and it'll reset all of your adjustment sliders. However, if there's only one that you need to reset, you can just double click on the text and it'll do that. So that's what we'll do there. But what I want to do is expose, open some shadows, and I also want it to be contrasted because, again, when you start to expose your image, you start to lose some contrast. So tell ON1 to give some of me that contrast back. Or give me some of the contrast back, I should say. All right, I'm painting at 100% opacity, and I'll control the overall opacity of this up at the filter level, or the adjustment level, I should say. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a little bit and hit the letter O. I am using the red mask today, and the reason for that is I want to be able to see where I'm painting as I paint over this bird. Now, I'm using a mouse, and I'm going to do as good of a job as I possibly can, but just know that if you're using a Wacom tablet, you might be able to get a little bit more refinement on your painting. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to make this perfect, because my goal here is just to show you techniques that you can use to edit your own images and hopefully give you ideas of what you can do. All right. That is the whole point of me making tutorials on this channel. It's not to tell you that my way is better. It's literally something that you can look at and say, okay, so that's how Chris does it. Maybe I can try it like that, or maybe I can try it a different way. And I think that that's perfectly fine. In fact, I know that that's perfectly fine, because if we do everything like everyone else, then we just have a bunch of copycats in the world. And I don't know if that is the most appropriate. I feel like that would get very boring, and your art and your creative style is way more important than mimicking mine. All right. But learn the technique, the idea, the concept, if you will, and then apply it to your own photos and your own editing style. So I'm going to call that a good mask. It's not the greatest, but you get the idea. I'm just painting this in over the bird. I'm going to hit the letter O. We'll go ahead and zoom out of the bird, and let's turn this off and on, see what we did there. And you can see it just adds a little bit of light to the bird. Now, I feel like maybe we can expose it just a little bit more, but I'm going to have to contrast that and maybe open up some shadows. Now, here's one of the things that I will share with you. Using the mid-tone slider is really a hidden weapon. Think of this as almost like a fill light. So if you're not getting what you want with the exposure, think of using your midtones to kind of fill in all of those areas that is just being missed. And it does it in a more natural way, I think, at least. So we'll go something like that. Now, I did paint this mask in with a very feathered brush. You can see it's at 100% feather, but what I'm going to do is throw in a little bit of extra feather, and that just helps with the overall blending. You don't have to do that. And I don't know if it really makes a huge difference, especially if I'm not going to be printing this particular image quite large, but just gives you that extra blend option, if you will. We'll go ahead and hit the before and after, or turning this effect on and off. And notice I'm not catching the back end of the bird, either the tail or whatever this may be called. I'm only focusing on the parts of the bird that I think are interesting. And that's what is important when you're doing this technique. Now, I feel like the bird is lacking in color. I could come down here and I can just push up on the vibrance and maybe the saturation, which I think that actually works out pretty decent. So I'll leave that be. Okay. So now that I have my bird adjustment made, I think I'm missing some detail in the eye of the bird. So let's go ahead and make another local adjustment, and we're going to make some details in the eye of the bird. All right. The way that I like to do this, I actually have a brush, or maybe I didn't save that brush. Well, I'm going to create it and then I'm going to save it. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase the exposure, increase the highlights, increase the structure. And in fact, I'm going to increase the exposure quite a bit. And I overbake these particular brushes because I control them with the opacity slider, and sometimes I even control them with blend modes. But for this particular brush, I leave it on normal blend mode. and I increase the structure, and I also dehaze. So I pull up on the haze slider so that way it reduces the haze, specifically good for helping eyes pop. And then I'll also increase the shadows just a little bit. I always come back and retweak this by image, but this helps me with animal eyes, I find. So let's go ahead and paint this in just to make sure that it is baked in the way that I want it to. So what I like to do is make my brush just a little bit larger than the area that I want to apply this to. So I'm going to go ahead and click one time, and you can see if I turn this off and on, it just adds a little pop to that area. Now, as I always mention, I like to look at my photos zoomed out, and hopefully this comes through on YouTube. But if I turn this adjustment off and I turn it back on, you can see that eye is just popping a little bit there. And that's what I really, really enjoy about this edit. Now, I could overdo it like this, and that wouldn't look too good. So we'll just go ahead and dial that back. And sometimes, you know, I may need to add some contrast and even more structure. And again, this is going to be something you will have to play with on your own images, but it's something that I do enjoy doing. And so I'm going to call this Bird Eye Bright. Now, I told you that I was going to save this preset as a brush. So in order for me to save this as a preset, I'm just going to hit more, and then I'm going to hit Save New Style. And I'll type this or call this FWP Animal Eye Brush. And as you start to develop your own styles, if you will, saving brushes will save you time. So next time, because I thought I already had this one saved, but apparently I didn't. Next time when I come back into ON1, I'll just grab that particular brush. I can paint it over the eye, reduce my opacity if necessary, and move on from there. All right. And it makes all of these settings for me so I keep a consistent look in my overall images. So that is the Bird Eye Brighten. So far, we've made 3 adjustments in Brilliance AI. Let's make one more adjustment, and this is just going to be head brighten. We'll just call it head bright. Keep it short, right? So I'm just going to increase exposure and pull up the midtones quite a bit. Make the brush about the size of the head. And I'm just going to paint right over the head. You can see it just gives that extra bit of light that I think is very helpful in making this bird stand out a little bit more prominently. And I may contrast that a little bit just to blend it in, because I do want this to blend quite well. All right. And that's the goal. So if I turn this off and turn it on, you can see what it's doing. Now, if you find that this particular edit, like if you brighten the face, if you find that that just makes the eye detail that you did look weird, well, consider putting it underneath that bird eye detail. So now when I turn off and on, it's not really impacting that particular area because the bird eye detail is on top of it. The way in which you stack your layers over here really does matter for your local adjustments. So this is the topmost layer, which is the most visible. This one is underneath it, and this one is underneath that. But most of these, they don't stack over each other. If you got questions, leave it in the comment section below. And if there's enough of them, then I will make a dedicated video that kind of explains what I was just talking through. Okay, so here's what we came into the edit bay with, and here is where we are right now. And honestly, this would be a great place to say, you know what, I can stop here. And when you get there, I recommend creating a snapshot, and I'll just say base edit. All right. This way, as you start to stylize your image, you can always get back to the base edit, and you may want to make a few different looks. So this is where, if I close out my properties here, this is where I can come in and maybe throw in a, let's see what hot desert does. There could be some pretty cool styles in here. Make these a little bit larger on the screen. There we go. I really like what HD4 looks like on this image. It's similar to what I already made. And this is that's probably the only one in this particular, I guess, that I'm liking. This is where you get to run wild with your imagination of what you want to see in your image. But I do like the light golden brown tones in here. This is too much red. But you know what? For the sake of tutorial purposes, let me show you how you can work with this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this particular adjustment, and it's going to add all of those into the effects, which it looks like there's only 2 items in this particular preset that I believe everyone has access to. So if you see something and you're like, man, I don't really like the way that red looks, it's probably coming from this color enhancer. Okay, maybe not. Let's see where, it's coming from vintage. Okay, so I know that some people say, hey, I just don't want to spend the time to unpack these particular presets that come with ON1, but this is a great learning opportunity. All right. This is how I learned to edit. This is how I learned to use the tools, by using the presets, looking at them and saying, hey, you know, this is what ON1 is saying they can do. Let me see how I like this. Now, I personally think that this is too much of that oatmeal color, but I like the red color. So what I can do is pull back on the saturation, and look at that. Now I'm starting to get back to that hot desert look, number 4, I think it was, that I enjoyed. But if I pull down on the opacity, now I'm blending it with the original. And there's other ways of really starting to get that look, but you got to go find, like, if you think everything else in a preset looks good, go find the aspect of the preset that you don't really care for and start to unpack it and say, okay, why is it doing that? And that's how you're going to grow in this particular program. Don't be afraid of something just because it doesn't look good originally. Figure out how to make it look good. And once you do that, then you'll be able to rebuild a lot of these. So what I'm going to do is just pull down on the vintage opacity, and then I'm going to come over to color enhancer, and let me just turn this off and on, see what it's doing. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that, so I'm going to leave that off. And I may even just pull down on this vintage a little bit more. But let me see what blend mode it's using. So it's using a normal blend mode. Instead of normal, let's go over to color. This is going to keep all of that definition that we've already put into the work in local adjustments. So I think that this may work better if it's on a color blend mode. And then if I pull this all the way up, you can see it's just adding color. It's not actually contrasting anything any more or any less. Now, I got to find where I like that fade, maybe somewhere around there, but I don't know if I really care for it over the bird. So what I'm going to do is come over to my masking, and I am going to mask this area in or away from the bird. So get my masking brush, and I'm going to pull the opacity down. I'll probably paint about 30%-ish, and I'm just going to erase from around the bird. And I do this in a few passes until I think it gets to a point where I'm okay with it. And if I hit the letter O, you can see that that's the area, I guess, that I'm protecting, if you will. And let me go ahead and turn this to the grayscale mask. So you can see If it's darker black, that means less of the effect is going to show through. But when it's gray, that means a little bit of the effect is going to show through. And I'm okay with that. I think that if I turn this off and on, it's a very subtle look, but that's just my style. I like it. All right. So the last thing that I'll do to really finish off this particular look is add some dynamic contrast. And I think that this is something that most nature photos will benefit from. But I don't want it everywhere. I really only want it on the bird and maybe a little bit on these trees. So what I'm going to do is, with the dynamic contrast selected, I'm going to go ahead and invert that mask so it's not showing anywhere. All right. And then I'm going to grab my paintbrush and I'm going to go to paint in. I'm going to pull up on my overall opacity, or actually, I'll leave it at 31, and I'm just going to paint over this branch here a few times to build up the effect on just the branch, right? Because I want this to look like it has some texture, the environment, make it look interesting. If I hit the letter O, you can see it's only a little bit there, and that's okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm really going to paint this in over the bird. And I'm just painting where I think it really ought to be. And we'll go a little bit more there. You can see that it's starting to build up the more that I paint over in that area. And that's the reason why I really like painting with opacity turned down. I can really control how it builds up. So now that I've done that, maybe what I'll do is increase on the small. Let's see if I pull up on the small. I don't want to make the bird look over processed, right? I want it to look somewhat natural. Maybe mess around with the large. And this is really making a difference on those branches that we painted over. So I'll leave it something like that. And I can adjust the tone here. If I really wanted to contrast, all I have to do is pull the blacks down, but I don't really care to do much else with that. So here's what we entered into the editing bay with, and here is the style that I created. So we'll call this edit 2. And I feel like there's one thing that I missed. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that because I think that it's important. And this is just how editing goes, right? You make an edit and then you realize like, oh man, I missed something. Well, I think this branch that is coming out of the back of the bird's head is distracting, and I don't think that it should be there. So we're going to come over to retouching, and let's see if the healing brush does us any good to get rid of it. So I'm just going to paint over it and try not to get too much of the bird in there. And then we'll just move this up to about there. Let's see. Okay, that did a decent-ish job, but it has some issues that I need to clean up. Let me zoom in just a little bit more. And we will go with the magic eraser or perfect eraser, whatever we call this thing. And I'm just going to hit over like these little areas and hopefully it will, well, that didn't do a good job. You know, it's simple things like this that really make your photo go to the next level. And sometimes you may need to go into Photoshop to do things like this, but I like to attempt to use the ON1 specific tools before I go into Photoshop. And you know, this is just one of those things. So clone stamp, okay, you don't want to work. Clone stamp doesn't want to doesn't want to behave. All right, let's close that out. Come back to retouch. All right, there we go. We'll sample right here. And I think that by sampling up there, we get a good portion of the sky that can be used to correct the issues that we're having over here. And, you know, this is purely something that I just felt needed to happen for this photo. You may not need to do this in your own images, and that is perfectly okay. But for me, I felt like it needed it. So I'm going to call that good because I don't want to belabor the point here. So we'll go like so and hit the Command and 0 to zoom out. So now I feel like there's no more distractions behind the bird's head. Let's go with view, and then there we go. And I'll just show you the retouching off and the retouching on. It just looks a little bit better. So hopefully you found some value in today's content. If you did, smash the like button. If you know someone who could benefit from this video, consider sharing it. If you want to pick up a copy of ON1 Photo Raw 2024 or anything else over at the ON1 store, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. It'll save you some money when you check out at no extra cost to you. I'd love to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts about this particular edit, or any questions you have about ON1 or layers or anything of that sort down in the comment section below. I will get back to you. May take me some time, but I will get back to you. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.